My name is Clancy, and I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank the chairman. It's not quite right. I flew to Minneapolis, to Milwaukee, to Chicago, to Atlanta, to New York. And I'm kind of tired, and I want to wish you all a lot of luck. I kind of lost track of the time. I'd forgotten next Sunday was Easter until this morning when I got off the plane and Ray O apostrophe K was at the airport, and he had Harry laying out palms in front of him through LaGuardia. Really kind of a touching sight. I'm glad to be here to see a number of friends who I've known before, some of you who have spoken in our group in California. Our beloved Bob P. spoke out there, and spoke and spoke and spoke, and a number of people, and it's nice to be here today. I used to drink. My reflexes are just a little slow today. I used to drink. I grew up in a, unlike you, I can look over this crowd and see poised, cool, sophisticated folks. I grew up in a little small town in northern Wisconsin. I'm basically just a unspoiled, unsophisticated, small town kid. And we're here to sell you some gold bricks. And I grew up in a very, very protected milieu. I was raised in something called the Norwegian Lutheran Church, which very few people have heard about anywhere else. Everywhere you go in AA, it seems to be a Catholic disease. If they're not, everybody's talking about the rigors of Catholicism and how the strictness of Catholicism. Come on, lady. Come on, lady. Oh. The rigors of Catholicism drive them to drink. In Eau Claire, Wisconsin, if you were a Norwegian Lutheran and you couldn't make it, and you were too weak and too fallible, and you had to find an easier, softer way, you became a Catholic. That was for the quitters. And early in the Second World War, when I was 15 in early 1943, and I was a junior in Eau Claire High School, and I had a great desire to see the world. The war was exciting. I went to a lot of movies. I read Life magazine. I was one of the cleverest kids in our homeroom, and I knew I was ready to go out there and make my move. So early in 1943, I told my mother I was going to go to Superior to visit my aunt, and instead I hitchhiked to San Francisco. And I had no idea how far it was. I know you went through 2 blue states and a yellow state is all I could tell. And I hadn't even been to Milwaukee yet. And I got one ride most of the way, and I got to San Francisco. And the first day I was there, I ran into some guy with my unerring ability who was able to give me a bum steer, and he told me that I could never do anything at 15. I'd have to be 16. He showed me how to prove I was 16, and he sent me to the Coast Guard office on Market Street, and they were crying for merchant seamen, and so I applied for merchant seamen's papers. And of course, they gave me a form to have my parents sign, so I walked around the block and had my parents sign it and brought it back. And they issued me temporary seamen's papers, and they referred me to the National Maritime Union down on Montgomery Street. And I went down there. It was all just like fantasy land. And they had me sign a waiver saying they'd take my union dues out of my first check. And they assigned me to a pier at the Embarcadero. And that night, I was on a load of torpedo warheads going to the South Pacific. And about 2 hours out of port, it suddenly struck me. This is not quite it either. I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. And I kind of sidled up to the captain and told him I really enjoyed this opportunity, but I really should get back because we had a big English test Monday and I didn't want to miss that. And I guess he wished me well. He told me to luck off. And told me to get to my forecastle, whatever that was. And that sounded very, made me apprehensive. And I turned out to be a forecastle, just a sleeping room. But I was small and skinny, and I weighed about 120 pounds, and I had a face full of pimples all ready to go at any moment. And I had a fast mouth, and I got stuck in this room with three of the worst type of people that a skinny, pimply-faced punk can ever be stuck with. And these type of people are called men. And they didn't think I was cute at all. And I went through all my lines that used to kill them in study hall, and they just, why don't you shut up and get in your goddamn bunk? Yeah. And I really felt bad. I remember on that ship was moving, the earth was out of sight, and I was lying there, and I wanted my mother or my grandmother or aunts or anybody. Just Eau Claire, Wisconsin really looked good. Then these guys were talking about their experiences in San Francisco while they'd been in port, and I soon came to the conclusion, these are sinners. I had never heard of anything like that ever. As I often say, don't misunderstand me. I don't want to leave the wrong impression. Even in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, at the age of 15, I'd had sex, but I'd been apprehensive, and I'd been afraid, and I'd been alone. And give me an ashtray. Ashtray. My Batman is a little slow this morning. Oh, you can have... No. You don't want that? No. Keep it for yourself, Ray. And I was really, I never heard anything like it. And I don't think I ever felt so bad. And one of these guys went to his locker and went into his sea bag in his locker and took out a bottle of whiskey. And I had never seen a bottle of whiskey close up in my life at that time. And he went to one of his friends and he said, "You want a little snort?" The guy said, "Yeah." "You want a little snort?" The guy said, "Yeah." And he turned to me and he had a very unpleasant look on his face. Today, a little more sophisticated, I would call it a patronizing look, but I didn't know what a patronizing look was. It's just an unpleasant look. He said, "How about you, Junior? You think you're man enough for a little snort?" And I looked up at him, and I didn't say anything, but I just thought at him. My watery blue eyes blazed. I thought, you big dummy. I guess you've never seen a Lutheran, have you? You must be one of them Catholics I heard about. Lutherans don't drink whiskey. And even if they did drink whiskey, I wouldn't drink whiskey because I promised both my mother and grandmother formally that I never would. And even if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't drink whiskey because young people today aren't aware of it. But in my era, when I was growing up, in those days, since most of my knowledge was gained from movies, heroes didn't drink in movies in those days. Bad guys drank. Errol Flynn never took a drink in his life, to my knowledge. Well, not in Sherwood Forest, he didn't. Guys like Basil Rathbone drank, you know, while they're sending the secrets to King Philip of Spain. I remember that very clearly. Buck Jones never took a drink in his life. Always some old rustler named Slade. Yeah. Let's go kill Buck Jones's horse. Come on. There's no chance I'm ever going to drink. And that big, black-haired, foreign-looking goof stuck that bottle in my face. He said, "You think you're man enough for a little snort?" And I just looked up at him and I said, "Damn right." Because I've always been a little weak under pressure, too. And I had my first drink of whiskey, the first whiskey I ever saw close up I drank, and it burned my mouth, and it burned my throat, and burned my stomach, and then it burned my stomach and burned my throat and burned my mouth and burned his shirt the last I saw them. And what I remember most about that experience is that it wasn't even being sick. It was the scornful laughter. I don't think there's anything worse can happen to people when they feel inadequate than to have people spot them as being inadequate, because that really is a grind. And I've thought about that a lot of times, or things like that. And if people like me, I don't know about like you, but people like me, when you are when everything is going to hell, you got to find something to hang it on, a hook to hang it on. You can't just say everything's rotten. You can say, because of this. And I got thinking, if I hadn't thrown up that whiskey, they would have thought I was a man. And I completely forgot. They thought I was inadequate because I was inadequate, not because I didn't throw up their whiskey. But every day, all the way across the Central Pacific, I would sneak into that sea bag sometime when nobody was around and take a drink of that slop and throw it up and wipe it up and drink it and throw it up and wipe it up, and it really got to be tedious. And I remember a day out of Pearl Harbor, I took a drink of that slop and nobody was around, and it burned my mouth and burned my throat and burned my stomach and stayed there. I remember thinking, now if I could just do this and not make a face, terrible. And about a minute later, I guess, as I recall, I had the first of many miracles that happened to me when alcohol stayed in my body. You know, when alcohol did something special in my body. A lot of people apparently drink for years, and one day alcohol begins to do something special to them, and they call that crossing the invisible line into alcoholism. Some people drink for a short time and they cross that line. And there are others, people, I guess like me, and I'm sure like some of you, who have crossed the line the first time out of the chute. It just does something. And I remember I've heard that feeling described, and I know we've all had the feeling. Alcoholics, some people say it made me handsomer, it made me prettier, it made me stronger, it made me feel like things. The best way I've ever been able to try to think of it myself is that when alcohol works for me, it gives me a momentary feeling of omnipotence. Just and I had it that day, and then I got sick and threw up, and it went away. But for a few moments in time and space, I felt different, and I've looked back on that, and I guess that why that was so significant in my life is because that was the first time in my life that I can ever remember that I felt the way men looked. And that's what I wanted to do. And many, many years later, I took my last drink. By that time, I was much more slick. Later in the war, I'd been in the Navy. Then I took some examinations, so I didn't have to go back to high school. I went to college instead, and I got married in college, and I was a member of a national championship team, and I was editor of the yearbook, and I went out in the world, and I became a sports writer, and I got into advertising work and advertising agencies and public relations and things like that. And I traveled around. I was in big cities and did this and that. And years later, I took my last drink. And by that time, I'd had many experiences. I'd been in analysis. I'd been deeply into metaphysics. I knew truth. Not easy carrying that load either, I'll tell you. And if I took my last drink for much different reasons. If anybody asked me why I was drinking, I could give them a dissertation on the conflict that existed between the parent and the child for the control of the adult in my psyche. And the metaphysical insights and the Nietzschean influences of discovering I was an Übermensch. A lot of reasons. Besides that, I'd made a rotten marriage. I'd been tricked into marriage by a Catholic. And we had a lot of children because in those days, my wife was and still is a very good lady and a nice practicing Catholic girl, and There was no birth control in our house, ever. She told me about the rhythm system, and I never could pick up the beat. I just, And I just became a machine to turn out small Catholics. Just, yes, man, it just... And... But I look back, I had many reasons why I drank. But I look back on my last drink in that era, and I would say now, or I will have said now for some years, when I had finally got some reputable insight, and I think it would be safe to say that I took my last drink for the same reason I took my first drink, to feel the way men looked. Now, there's nothing wrong with a little 15-year-old pimply-faced punk drinking to feel like a grown-up. But when you're getting old and bald and wrinkled, and your kids are growing up, you shouldn't have to drink to feel grown up then. And I would never have identified it, but I'm sure that was the case. And I drank to feel grown up. But I never knew it till it was way too late, till long after I'd been driven to A&A. I had a lot of problems in my life, but they had nothing to do with drinking as such. I always had the feeling that somehow or other, I didn't ever feel I don't remember any feelings that my emotions were significantly different than other people's emotions. It just seemed they were more on the surface than other people's emotions, that there was a layer of insulation left off somewhere. I remember joking in a bar one time and telling a guy that it seemed to me when I came off the assembly line in heaven, I got to the insulating operation, and somebody said, "Hey, God," and God said, "Yeah." Oh, he's a Norwegian, to hell with him, And my problem has always been I have a tendency to react. And my reactions give me problems. That's a strange thing, too. I guess it's safe to say that probably it happens to all human beings, and it certainly happens to people like us a lot. But there's a certain innate thing that people, when they're feeling insecure, and you're in a strange situation, when you're in a frightening situation, when you're a little over your head and you don't want people to know it, when you're at 6s and 7s out there in that big world, you have an instinctive, when you're in a strange situation especially, people have an instinctive reaction to see how you're doing by instinctively comparing yourself against them, just to see how. Now, there's nothing wrong, that's quite human. The trouble is when the more insecure you get, the more often and the more intense you do it, till pretty soon you're doing it a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that every comparison you make is always invalid, and it must always be invalid because of something nobody ever thinks about. But I got to compare my insides against their outsides, and that's two different commodities. I got to compare my raw meat against the defenses they've built up to conceal their raw meat. And no matter whether I consider myself superior to them or inferior to them, it's an invalid comparison. But the more you make these comparatives, it's like a snowball rolling down a hill. The more different you feel. And the more different you feel, the more comparatives you make, and on and on. And the problem is you wind up, people like I do, and I suppose like you do, feeling different, more and more different. Because I look back over my life, I don't recall ever seeing anybody who looked as sensitive as I felt. They just a bunch of dummies as far as I could tell. Not dummies, but dummies, that's what they were. I don't recall ever seeing anybody that looked as though they felt the anxiety I felt. I don't think it ever crossed my mind in my life that other people also lay awake at night making plans how to hold them bastards at bay. I just assumed everybody else went to bed, and I was the only one who laid awake trying to figure it out. I don't recall anybody who looked as though their lonelinesses were as poignant as mine. Most people, their lonelinesses are just, like, I was kind of lonely last night, so I called up Fred and we went to the show. Yeah. They don't know what lonely is. Lonely is when you're alone and you don't even want to talk to Fred or anybody else. Sometimes it's just so delicious when it might be Irvay Street in Dallas to everybody else, but it's the battlements at Elsinore to me, and I just a tragic figure. Sit in a room, and I don't know what young people do today. I don't know how you can sing along drunkenly to rock records, but in the days of the ballad, it was much easier, I'll tell you. And think about her, and try to remember what her name was, you know. And I just still get a tingle of ecstasy when I think of sitting there just in the bag and playing the record and singing along. Birds fly over the rainbow. It really is so rotten that it's almost delicious. It's just, it's like having a portable cross. You just set it up wherever you are and, just hang for a while. I don't recall ever seeing anybody that, in my opinion, looked as though they resented injustice as much as I felt. I have always been a battler for justice. Young folks today think they're the first ones who ever fought for justice for all mankind. I fought for justice for all mankind before it was slick. Just like young folks today, I stood out there in a lot of forums and said, justice! Justice for all mankind! And like the young folks today, I also said, if there's not enough to go around, you give me mine now and we'll... What do they know? But as you get older and wiser in this cruel world, you get a few more miles on the track, you begin to realize that you're not crying for justice anymore. The cry changes a little bit. It becomes, mercy, mercy. You start to realize that justice, I always thought justice was having things the way I want them. And that isn't it. Justice is things as I deserve them. And I don't want things as I deserve them. I want things as I want them. And so, we're all here because of justice. That's rotten. Justice is when you get what you deserve. And I have always I've resented injustice. There's a lot of injustice in authority. People who have been given authority that don't have enough sense to use it wisely. I resent people who can alter how I feel based on how they happen to feel when they come to work that morning. I resent people who have the power and the authority to promote no-talent brown-nosers and hold back men of integrity who will not sell out. Who might sell out if they ever had a goddamn chance. They can't even get a chance to sell out. It's not been easy for me. I gave it all and that's why I had a lot of emotional disturbance. These are kind of few headlines, but emotions and finding things, having it just right, and then having them screwed up. And as a result of that, no one likes to live like that. I wanted to be something. And I went into analysis. And a lot of people in AA put down analysis. I never do. It was analysis that I first learned that I'd been victimized by forces beyond my control. Laugh if you want to, but it's a relief to find that out, I'll tell you. I didn't even know there'd been a depression, really, till I discovered I'd been warped by it. I remember the doctor saying to me one time, you mean, I guess we were talking about 1935, he says, you mean, Mr. Imbusland, in that year, 1935, you didn't even have a bicycle? And I thought about that for 2 months. I thought, I could just see a little tousled-haired, blue-eyed, apple-cheeked little fella on the street, every other kid in town. Oh, I don't mind. Have fun. It took me 2 months to remember that is the way it was, you know. Nobody knew Claire had a bicycle. One kid did, and we thought he was a sissy and beat him up. But if you have a streak of paranoia, man, analysis really, if you're like me, makes it blossom. You get so you know so much, at least I do, know so much about the factors that brought you to where you are, you completely overlook the fact everything is just getting worse. You know? It's like being on the deck of the Titanic and hitting the iceberg, and everybody else rows away, and people like me want to stay and see exactly what happened. And you may wind up with the answer. You may find the answer. You would say, all right, now I've got the answer. Oh, hell. It really doesn't do any good to have the answer when the whole thing is going down. Another time, as I said, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. That was my moonlight job. And I was having some difficulties, and I got into metaphysics, and I got into Ouspensky and insights. And as I say, I got to be one of 6 people in the whole state of Texas, to my knowledge, who knew truth. And the other 5 were just crapheads, just crapheads. And I got very cold and lonely at the top. I read philosophy. I did a lot of things. I sat in back porches with other pseudo-religiosos and found new insights into God and drank red wine and just getting it, and the sun comes up, and then everybody goes back to their caskets, get their wife up to go to work. It's not easy being a pseudo-intellectual in this world, I'll tell you. But I'll tell you, I look over my life, I've tried a lot of things, but nothing ever had the continuing good effect on me that alcohol did. Just a few drinks. That's why I drink. I'm not a drinker. I went to A&A meetings almost 30 years ago. And in fact, Friday night I was at a meeting in Wisconsin with my sponsor from that period. He still doesn't think I'm sober. Every time I see him, yeah. Terrible old man. Fortunately, I was chewing gum. But, you go to A&A, and that's for people who drink. That's not for people who think. That's for people whose problem is drinking. I don't know if I actually heard it, but it seemed to me I heard it a lot. I'd go to A&A meetings. Because people, I'll tell you this, if you're kind of new, people who don't understand your sensitivities and emotions, they just see you drink, and they say, well, you got a drinking problem. You go to A&A, and it'll get all better. And go in there, and you go to sit in some meeting, and there's some burned-out old fool in his 40s, and sallow cheeks, and saying things like, friends, I stayed drunk many years, night and day. And then one day I walked through that door, and they told me to put the plug in the jug, and I did. And I've just never been so goddamn happy. I don't know what that does for other people, but I just, boom, I'm ready to go. But my problem is not alcohol. My problem is finding the place where I fit, where a person of my maybe irregular psychological profile will fit in. And I did a lot of things, but a few drinks relaxes me. And the only problem is sometimes in that unfeeling world of Philistines and hypocrites and power-drunk autocrats and pressures, they put too much push on you. And the pressure gets too big, and sometimes you need more to relax than you might have. And sometimes you might even get drunky poo, just... And then comes the ultimate irony of it all. The very same crapheads that put the pressure on you are the very ones you'll discover who come around with their little thin blue lips. Say, aren't you drinking too much? Don't you remember you have children? Don't you like to work here? And there's something wrong about that. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made me brood. And when I brood and drink, bizarre things happen that have interrupted the orderly procedure of my life. For instance, in the spring of one year, I was living in a suburb of Chicago, and I was writing in an advertising agency. And I'd been nominated to be Junior Chamber of Commerce Young Man of the Year, and I had a home and a yard and dogs, and I'd have been all right, except that town was full of crapheads. It really was. And I got brooding. And by the end of that same year, 11 months later, I was playing piano in a whorehouse in San Francisco. Well, I'm not putting that down, you know. But I'll tell you one thing, it's hard to work that experience into an advertising resume. Yeah. That's why most AAs have resumes with holes in that say, self-employed at this time. But I used to, by that time I was angry because I remember thinking, my problem is I've always been trained to be good. I was catechized. I spoke to God in Norwegian, which is his native tongue. We used to kind of laugh, watch you get across the street at St. Pat's, come out from church, and know that they'd all been praying in Latin, and God's been saying, huh? Huh? Yeah. But I don't judge, I just report. We in AA don't judge. But I knew that somewhere, there had to be something. I'd been trained to be this good person, and I didn't have the ability to sustain being good. I'd never had any training in being evil, so I didn't know where the boundaries were. And that's the way I saw it then. You know, I was too weak to be good, and I had a flair for evil, but I had a conscience. So I couldn't enjoy being evil, and I couldn't enjoy being good. And there's really not, you know, they're just terrible. I remember I heard a guy when I was new saying, hey, remember this, newcomer, when one door closes, another door opens. And I went up to him afterward, I said, what are you doing? You spend your whole life in the hall. I hear the door, I hear the doors, but I never get there, you know. So I never could sustain any evil. My sponsor in California used to give a very touching analogy about the prodigal son. And as you know, as an AA, using AA as the analogy of the young man who'd taken his patrimony and wasted it, and now he was sleeping with the swine and the husks, and his father said, come home and be the son of the Lord, and he was sore afraid, but they bathed him and cleansed him with oils, and then clad him in shining raiment and sat him down next to his brother, and they killed a fatted calf, and they lived in peace. And I know that's true because that's happened to me several times. My problem has always been in my life is just as we finish the fatted calf, some hog comes by and says, we got a new shipment of husks in, you know. Boom, away I go. I just don't understand it. But I reformed again. I reformed in San Francisco, and I ran a guy I had been in the Navy with, and he and I hitchhiked to Texas, and a year and a half later, another springtime, I was working days as a copy chief at an advertising agency, as the faculty at night at the University of Texas at El Paso. I was writing a weekly sports thing for the El Paso Times. My wife had rejoined me, and 9 months and 10 seconds later, we had another little child. And I was doing fine, except El Paso is full of crapheads. If it weren't for Juarez, you couldn't make it in El Paso. And pretty soon, one of these blue-lipped fools at the deans at the university called me and said, Imisland, we're getting reports that you're acting bizarrely at night. Now, if you're kind of new around here, I'm going to tell you something. Anytime anybody ever talks to you with little thin blue lips, don't even try to explain. They're going to understand it. I remember thinking, I wish I could explain to you, but obviously I can't, because you're a part of the gray world. But do you understand that not everybody is a goof, not everybody is a square, not everybody is an automaton? There are sensitive, intelligent people, and that for some of us, I don't know how to, wouldn't even try to explain it to you, but for some people, for instance me, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when I stand balancing on one foot on top of the bar of the Chinese Palace in downtown Juarez, and I have a glass of tequila and a lime and some salt, and I sing my little song, Yo soy el maestro de los locos en Chihuahua. That relaxes me, goddammit. You know, I don't know why. And so in order to protect my pregnant wife, I had to go on the wagon. And I went back to A&A. I've been going to A&A for 3 or 4 years, and the same old fools. Well, you hang in there, turn it over. Get your hands off me. Yeah. And by the end of that summer, I'd had all I could take from all over, and one day I just went and committed suicide in the garage. And the guy next door pulled me out and beat on my chest, and they took me down to the psych ward and examined me and classified me as a depressive schizophrenic and assigned me for an indefinite period up to the rest of my life in the Texas State Insane Asylum at Big Spring, Texas. Well, I thought I'd been depressed before, but just, you know, I really was depressed, and I might have been there yet, because I was supposed to, you know, except one guy saved my life, and I'm sure he didn't mean to. He says, you know, he told me, you can't run away from this place. It's impossible. And that caught my attention. Really? And it just took me, you know, big $70 a month rednecks. If I can't outsmart them, I deserve to be in there. And it took me 2 weeks to get through a door and down a corridor and through another door and across the yard and over the fence. And the fox was loose in West Texas. And the only trouble is you get over that fence and you suddenly realize the guy is right. You can't run away. Because I don't know if you've ever been in West Texas, but you suddenly realize they can see you running for 3 days. Then
Thought I had my ship with me.
That's more water than they got in Texas. And you know, you feel like such an idiot in your white bathrobe just just going. And it's just a matter of time till those field glasses pick you up, you know. Well, there goes that little Yankee sumbitch now. Boom. And I spent the rest of that autumn on electric shock. Well, the next year I thought there must be some other way out of here. This could hold back my career. And by a stroke of great good fortune, that spring they put in the first alcoholic ward in a state hospital in Texas. They put it in our hospital. And I was off the shock by then, so I knew a little bit of what was happening. But you couldn't go in there if you were a psychiatric patient. It was a special program. And so I nailed this counselor as he was an AA guy. And I thought I tried to get a newcomer's look. And I was fighting for existence. This wasn't ethics. And I said, Mr. Ross, I'm here on a suicide commitment from El Paso, and I understand that you people have some sort of a program that deals with drinking. You know, all my life I've been happy except when I drink, and then there's almost an obsession to keep drinking, and it ruins everything. And do you have any kind of literature I could read? Is there any sort of book you have? Or if I could just find a way to get back the God I lost in alcohol. And his eyes went, I had that old fool. And he said, I'll be back in a couple of days, Clancy. And I thought he burned me off, but it turned out that he had to check with Austin. I didn't know this till years later. He told me about it years later. And he had to go through Austin, and I became the pilot study in the state of Texas as to whether psychiatric patients could go into the alcoholic ward for meetings. And they couldn't have made a better selection because I wasn't burdened with any sincerity that would interfere with my behavior. And I'd go in there and sit, and he'd give us lectures on the steps. You know, just dreary lectures, just on and on. Nobody wanted to hear him. He'd get all done. because everybody else in that ward was there for 30 days. Then they're going to go home. Their family put them in there for 30 days. I was in there forever. And, you know, kind of, you sit next to a guy in a meeting and say, what are you going to do when you get out, Fred?
I'm going to kill that bitch.
You know. But old Mr. Ross would say, are there any questions? Nobody had any questions. I'd ask questions, and everybody got to hate me, but pretty soon I got to be secretary of the group. Everybody else kept coming and going, and I stayed, and they used to take me out of there to give little talks in Midland and Odessa. Even today, I'm sorry to say, when I hear inmates come out to speak at AA meetings, a small glaze just kind of drops over my eyes, because they probably are sincere, but I don't think they will know if they're sincere until they face the... But I'd give little talks of, friends, I'm just happy to be here tonight on behalf of my fellow patients at the State Hospital to thank each and every one of you for bringing a message of faith and hope to each of us. It's as though we had lost our path on a vast desert of alcoholism, and we came upon the tall green hill of sobriety, and it was too steep for our weary legs. But folks such as you pointed out 12 golden steps that we could climb one after another until we could stand high on top of the hill of sobriety and be close to our God and go back to our communities and tell them what we have found. And old ladies would cry, isn't that beautiful? Yeah. Now you can laugh. They got me out of the Texas Nut House. And the funny thing is, I never had another drink till I ran out of pills. But when you run out of pills, you can really see life for what it is. Well, I reformed again. My wife got pregnant. And the next spring, I had the best job, one of the best jobs of my life. I was working at Tracy Locke, the largest advertising agency in the South, and I was working on the ads. If you're old, you remember them, for Elsie and Elmer, these dreary cows talking to each other. And I'm doing fine, except Dallas is full of crapheads. And to make a tedious story just slightly less tedious, later that year, I woke up one morning in August and I was on the floor of the Phoenix drunk tank. And a guy had just got done kicking my front teeth out because I'd vomited on his bunk. And I'll tell you, that was one of the few mornings I was ever glad that I'd been in analysis, because I'll tell you, once you've been in analysis, you always have kind of an extra insight that enables you to see things. And I remember that morning I was too sick to move my head away from his shoe, but I was still almost instantly able to identify his problem. Remember, I think, this man is overreacting. And I got out of that jail, and then I think I better go home. I think, no, I remembered my wife had taken all the little girls and moved into a post office box. So they're kind of cramped, but to hell with them. And I'd lost my luggage. I'd had 2 matched Safeway shopping bags, and they had my awards in them. And I thought, maybe Seattle. And so I started to go to Seattle. I got to Los Angeles. Had a terrible time. I went out to that A&A club there, and the same old goofs, you know.
Well, keep coming back. It'll be all right now.
And jump in their Lincolns and drive away. Oh, really? Really? You know. I finally got nailed stealing the coffee money after a meeting, and that was a humiliating moment in my life. I got banned out of the AA club. So I went down to the beach. Some crazy old fool was starting something called a Tender Loving Care Club, and I hung around with him, but the AA central office gave him hell because he was calling it AA, and he had replaced the higher power in his movement. And so he had to throw all of us alcoholics and non-alcoholics out, and I thought he was crazy, but he changed his name to Synanon, made himself a lot of dough off those fools. If I'd have stuck with him, I'd have been something today, I'll tell you. When I get here and Ray O'Keefe is mean to me, I wouldn't have to take it. I'd take a rattler out of my pocket. Yeah. And so I went down on Skid Row in Los Angeles. I was going to write a book on Skid Row, and I didn't have any pencil. And so I lurked down there, and I got in a fight in the Midnight Mission and got banned out of the Midnight Mission, which is the end of the trail. And I got into trouble in the Union Rescue Mission. And I couldn't believe it. I remember thinking, maybe I've been born in the wrong century or in the wrong planet or the wrong country, but there's something terribly different. And All I've ever wanted to be is a good man in a good world, and I just can't get it together. By that time, I wish I were an alcoholic. I wish I were an alcoholic. I wish my problem was drinking. I wish I could be like those old turkeys who stop drinking, just gets gooder and gooder. And when I stop drinking, all it does is takes away whatever cushion I got against an unfeeling, insensitive, craphead-filled world. I wish I were a narcotic addict. I wish I were anything. And one morning I went over to sell a pint of blood, and they said I didn't have enough iron in my blood to sell for $4 a pint on Skid Row anymore. And that morning I knew I was dying, and I remember thinking, it might sound a little ludicrous now, but it wasn't ludicrous then. I remember thinking, maybe my suicide in El Paso really was successful. And this has just been hell maybe it's going to be this way for eternity. It sounds a little weird, but that's the way I felt. And I walked out, it was raining, and I had no place to go, so I walked 71 blocks out to that stinking AA club. Because there's no place else. You can't go to the ad club, Can't. I was nominated to be JC Man of the Year. How am I doing, Ace? And the guy let me in finally, and I went in the back room. He says, stay out of sight. Don't let anybody know I let you in. You're not in good around here.
No, that's right.
And I lay on the sofa in the dark room, and I thought, I'm going to get some dough. I'm going to play their sick little game with them for a few days till I can get some dough, and I'm going to go to Seattle. And if I can't get some dough, I'll wait in that parking lot, and one of these fools going to get in his big Lincoln. I'll give him a rap on the head with a tire iron, and I'll get some money, and I'll make amends later. But I had no idea that morning, or the next morning, or the next week, or the next month. I didn't know for a long, long time that would be my sobriety day, because I never intended it to be, because sobriety doesn't help emotional people. And now it's been something over 20 years since that morning. And I haven't had a drink in my body, and I haven't been at all seduced by those well-intentioned but lethal members of the medical profession who still labor under the misapprehension that alcoholism is caused by a Valium deficiency. I have not been at all particularly taken by the little groups of weeds of people who grow up around AA, and they all think they're the first ones who say it. They say,
Book doesn't mention pot, baby.
the book mentions people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. In fact, just about a month ago, I found out that the book does mention pot. Maybe you already know it, but I just found out. I was rereading Bill's story. On the first page of Bill's story, he talks about a little inscription on a gravestone in England that he saw. Said, what does it matter? Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who died of drinking cold small beer. A good old soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Just bringing you a little truth. And the funniest thing of all is that I haven't had any therapy since 1958, except that dumb old A&A that never wasn't enough for me, ever. And I had sunk so low I had to get a less than quality sponsor. I had to get a guy who took an interest in my case. He went to the school for hard-hearted sponsors. My rise was not very meteor-like. The first months I was sober, I lived in the back seat of an abandoned car. But it was in the AA club parking lot, so there's a certain spiritual aura that fell on me every morning. I got a job. The guy in AA gave me a job as a janitor in a jewelry store, and I lost it after a day and a half because he felt I was dusting too long amongst his watches. And a few years later, he got on pills, and I became his sponsor. And I made him pay for that, I'll tell you. But I'll tell you, he was absolutely right, because I had a vision of myself in Seattle saying, see anything you like? I was going to make amends to him. I got a job as a furniture mover, hardly up to my standards. And some guy giving me hell about that. Hey, you without the teeth, you bumped my lamp. No, you're mistaken, sir. I broke your goddamn lamp. Boom. You know. I got a job as a dishwasher at the Gaiety Delicatessen, and about the second day I was there, I began realizing I got more dishes than they're eating on. And it became clear to me the busboys were bringing in dishes from other restaurants. I wouldn't want to defend it this morning, but that's the way it seemed to me then. And I lost my job. The first job I held ever was when I was a year sober, and I got a job as a busboy. And I remember telling my sponsor, this is ridiculous. I've never been a busboy, but the guy I'm working for he doesn't know nothing about being a busboy. He tells me dumb things to do, and if I do them, I'll look bad and I'll get fired. My sponsor says, I got an idea. I guess by this time he's starting to understand me. He says, I got an idea for you. Let's get him. Do everything he says, and when the heat comes, you just say, I was following orders. They'll fire him, and you'll get his job. That's it. And I went to work, and I did everything that fool told me. And that was the first job I didn't get fired from. I never got his job either, but when I was a little over a year sober, I got a job at an advertising agency wrapping packages, the same kind of job I'd had when I was a freshman in high school. When I was 2 years sober, I got a little job in a big medical corporation. When I was 5 years sober, I'd become director of advertising for that corporation, which shows you what can happen if you go to work every day. And by the time I was 7 years sober, I'd become slick again. I really was slick, and they brought a couple guys and I into Hollywood, and we created something called Boss Radio for a radio station. It became the #1 hard rock station in the world, and we just, oh, baby, we rocked and rocked. Then I got tired of pimping to 13-year-olds. And when I was 10 years sober, I was doing public relations downtown for the oil companies. And I was 15 years sober, I was marketing director for a publishing firm in Beverly Hills. When I was 5 years sober, the same wife and daughters heard the crinkle of green in my wallet all the way to a post office box in Dallas, Texas. Leaped out of their box with a hoarse cry, get the proddy dog, get the proddy dog. That's a term they use in our family for Protestants, proddy dog. It's not easy. And they fled to my side, where they've been ever since, and 9 months later we had a little boy. In fact, last week he was confirmed. Let me give you something. He was confirmed in St. Mark's Church in our parish, and I'm very good. I'm in good with him now. I have a daughter who's intended becoming a nun, and my wife is in charge of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine for our parish, and I'm an honorary member of the parish almost. And so they needed an honor guard for the bishop to march from the sacristy to the church, and the priest said, Clancy, would you take part in our honor guard? And the old bishop came by with his big hat and I thought I just saw his nostrils. Could that have been a proddy dog? No. But you know. So isn't that nice? Now I'm doing fine. I wear 3-piece suits, travel on airplanes, got a home out by the ocean, comfortable. And now that's what a perfect AA story should be. Down and out, Skid Row, in jail, in nut house. And now just goddamn wonderful. And I want to tell you one thing, newcomer. I got it together and you haven't. Get out. There's just one more little thing I want to say before I sit down. And that is, you may have the feeling that I used to have a lot. How do you get from there to there? It's all very nice to say, because it goes very fast when you talk about it. Well, then next year I was wonderful, and next year I was rich, and it kind of goes kind of fast. The days don't go quite that fast when you're slogging them out there. And you really don't have any, it's so easy to tell these all old-timers, it's easy for them in retrospect. But when you're living through it, you don't know what's going to happen. You can't say, well, another 4 years and a half I'll be sober, and then I'll make it from there. Just I would tell you, the most important thing I'll tell you about my recovery, the most important thing I'll say today or I'll say before I sit down, I've already said, and I said it the minute I got up, and we just take it for granted when we hear it. I said, my name is Clancy Immisland, and I'm an alcoholic. And that is the most important thing I've said, because that was the single most difficult thing I ever had to learn to accept in my life. In 1958, I would have bet my life, and did bet my life, I wasn't really an alcoholic. Because how can you be an alcoholic when your basic problem is not really alcohol? I do have an alcohol problem, no question about that, and sometimes drinking is destroying me. But unlike other people, that is not really the problem. The problem is feelings of alienation and frustration and anxiety and if only and all the things, and you want to just, it's trying to change things around you, it's striking under the black velour drape. It just, they fall back into place that, and it isn't drinking, I'm sober. And nobody understands. I'm certainly glad that I got so desperate that those old fools in AA got inside my head and screwed me up. So I was able to survive long enough to discover that the way I felt then is the way I feel now. I'm 20 years more convinced that my problem is not and never was alcohol. Now that sounds kind of upsetting in an AA meeting, doesn't it? But I'll tell you something else. In my opinion, I am forced to say that. You're forced to say it's in my opinion. I secretly feel I speak for AA.
Erase that off the tape there. Somebody wake up the tape man.
But in my opinion, if your problem is alcohol, you're in the wrong place. You shouldn't be here. You're wasting your time for two reasons. AA has no tools to deal with an alcohol problem, and even if they did, you don't need it. I never have been able to understand these stories I hear sometimes. They say, all my life, everything was wonderful. Then I drank and went crazy. Then I got sober, and everything was wonderful, and everything was happy. And I drank and went crazy. And then and you just feel like saying, why did you drink? Dummy? If your problem is alcohol, I got a solution for you that's going to render your life happy. Don't drink. Just knock it off. Shape up. Throw them tiny shoulders back. That's all you got to do. You don't. But if it turns out that you suffer from what I suffer from, you may go to your grave and never have a clue of what the hell was wrong. You know a lot of things that weren't wrong, but you won't know what's wrong. And it isn't alcohol. But it's so sad because a lot of people, after they come to AA, die from alcohol because they keep thinking the problem is alcohol. A lot of us have spent our lives as booze fighters. I'm going to not drink. And without ever realizing that what the problem is not alcohol. It sounds like alcohol, and we talk a lot about drinking in AA, but it isn't alcohol. It's something called alcoholism, which sounds like the same thing, a three-letter suffix, some kind of sophistry, some kind of nonsense. But in my opinion, that three-letter suffix and understanding it saved my life, and it saved the life of nearly everybody that I've known who's been sober any length of time in AA. Because the difference is just this. If your problem is alcohol, when you get sobered up, you are recovered. There's no further therapy necessary. You may need some patching up physically, but that's all. You say, hey man, that stuff is eating me up. I'm going to drink it no more. In alcoholism, when you sober up, unfortunately, it looks exactly the same. It looks the same to your family. It looks the same to your employer, to your clergyman, to your friends. And unfortunately, it looks the same to yourself. That's the deadly part. Because no one ever seems to put together in those situations that the difference between alcohol problem and an alcoholism problem is that when you get sober, alcoholism continues on into sobriety. But you don't recognize it because your voice isn't slurred anymore and you don't stumble and fall down and pass out and all that baloney. Because you don't, I never knew anybody who, going through it, who recognized it. Alcoholism seems to manifest itself in sobriety by settling into the emotions and creating sometimes slightly warped perspectives of reality. and making things look different and making things look not quite the way other people see them, and to have a framework of attitudes and that are gradually stifling you. And you, little by little, it gets to be too much. The anxiety and the frustration and there's no hope. You've done the best you can. Eventually comes those three words that kill people like us. And it isn't, I need booze or give me alcohol. It's much deeper. Just when you're sober and you're hanging on and you're doing the best you can, and just, what's the use? What's the use? That's not my problem. Scientists who study alcoholics, some of them say that alcoholics who go on the wagon, eventually many of them have to drink to preserve their sanity, or else they'll break. And you go to A&A, and they say, if you drink, you'll go crazy. It don't leave you a hell of a lot, I'll tell you. You know. And warnings don't seem to help. I remember they told me when I was a kid I was going to go blind at one time. I started to believe it when I needed bifocals, I'll tell you that. But warnings don't help. Intellectual knowledge doesn't help. Now, unhappy or unpleasant reality, is that what makes you an alcoholic? No. That isn't what makes you an alcoholic. Partially, but it isn't. Because there's millions of people who have that, but they're not alcoholics. They're just neurotics. Something else has to be present, and that is you have to have a body that alcohol does something special for. And what that special thing is, to the best of my ability to judge it, alcohol's effect on me is to take the same things and make them look different. It alters my perspective almost immediately. And it doesn't do that for 93% of people or something who drink alcohol. That's why those dummies, you hear them say things like, oh, no more for me, I'm starting to feel it. You know. You want to just grab them and say, that's when it gets good. You know. If you don't feel it, don't drink it, you know. But I mean, one of the great examples of that, when I was wrapping packages in that advertising agency about 14 months sober, and one of our accounts there was, I was wrapping packages, delivering the mail, actually. I was a two-hatter. And one of our accounts was something called Kamchatka vodka, which is a big West Coast vodka anyway. And I went by there, the mail one day, and these writers were deciding what to put on the billboard. And I thought, I'm going to let them know that in this skinny guy without front teeth, spiritual, they got a guy who maybe is a little brighter than they think. Maybe I'm ready to make my move. And I went by and said, I've got an idea, guys. If I should just put on that billboard, Kamchatka vodka goes, boom, better than all vodkas everywhere. And they just gave me that same sneering, patronizing look. Why don't you peddle your mail? And I just whined to my sponsor that night. I said, by God, now that proves it. I don't care what you say. I gave them a good slogan, and they wouldn't use it because they're down on me because I look like nothing. And it's just not fair. And he says, listen to me. Get this through your head. They didn't know what the hell you were talking about. Kamchatka vodka doesn't go boom to them. He says, Kamchatka vodka goes blah, 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 to them. That's why you're here and they're there. Now, the next time you get into one of your moods and wish you were wishing you'd have been a non-alcoholic, I don't think very many alcoholics would have ever settled for a non-alcoholic life. Can you imagine what it must be to go through life, your whole life, when you're back to the wall and the hounds of fate tearing at your throat? Take a drink. Oh, God. Have it go. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah. Do you know that 93% of people who drink, all those people we theoretically used to envy, never know what we take for granted? When the hounds are at your throat, it doesn't go blah. It goes boom.
Just simple.
Nothing changes, but it looks different. I remember one time in El Paso, we were waiting for the alcoholic's friend, Household Finance, to call. And they're going to call at 10 o'clock to let us know if they're going to repossess our furniture. Well, it was about 10 to 10, and there's a lot of tension in the house, and I was into my rum and wicker basket phase at that time. And I offered my wife a drink. I tried to be nice to her. God, I'd given her. I said, "You want a little drink, Charlotte?" She gave me that same non-alcoholic baloney you hear. "What's the matter with you, for God's sake? You ruined your life. You want to ruin mine?" You know. There are some people that just don't recognize kindness. And I had a good shot of Bacardi rum, and at 10 o'clock, I was the only one poised enough to answer the phone. And I remember hearing myself saying, "You keep up this shit, I ain't going to borrow from you anymore." Yeah. Nothing had changed, but it looked different. And that is a great thing. I don't know of a therapy in the world, no, I'm sure anyone here does, any therapy anywhere that can take a suicidal depressive and in 10 minutes that same person can be leaning against a bar with a little smile playing across his pallid lips and saying things like, "You with anyone, Granny?" You know, just things look different, goddammit. It look different, you know. Now, if reality is untenable and alcohol changes it, that combination is called alcoholism. And then when alcohol gets to be a problem, you got to now return to a sobriety that's untenable, and you can't stay there, and you can't stay in the alcohol, and you're a gone goose. And you think, well, by that time you're on Skid Row. But I'll tell you, I've made 12-step calls to Bel Air where the butler has shown me into the inside maid, who showed me to the back rooms maid, who's taken me into a bedroom, seemed about half as big as this room, it really wasn't. On the wall, 2 Oscars, the New York Theater Critics Awards, the best playwright of the year, and nothing but awards all over, and a man sitting in bed, cold sober. And after when I started talking to him, I realized he felt exactly the same feelings I felt standing outside of the Midnight Mission on Skid Row. The same emotions. Last week, we were talking at the table, you know, every 5 weeks or so, I go down and address one of the new group of students at the Long Beach Naval Hospital, and you really get a fast track down there every once in a while. Peanut farmers and shit far. And I got talking to one of those guys, one of those peanut farmers, and as far as I could determine, his feelings were exactly the same as mine when I walked up Wilshire Boulevard in my T-shirt, only he wasn't in that condition. And it doesn't really make any difference whether you're a president's wife or whether you're a out-of-work bootblack. The thing that combines us was when you get caught in the vice where you can't drink and you can't stay sober and you're trapped and it's going down and you can't understand it at all. But you know one thing, going on the wagon doesn't help it. That's why most people like us will die from it. They don't know what they got, but they know what they haven't got. They haven't got an alcohol problem, really. And a great many people who are in AA today will die drunk because they will stay sober until the novelty wears off, and then they won't stay sober anymore. It's really sad. This must got to be the only illness in the world where one of the greatest symptoms you have to fight is your own brain telling you you really don't have it after you're straightened out. Now, the reason I mention all that is that if you're kind of new today or if you're preparing to graduate, you might want to think about AA the way I blessedly came to think about AA, that AA is not designed to make you wonderful. AA is not designed to make you float above the level of the ground. AA is designed for a much more subliminal and complex purpose. I think that the reason that you go to AA, go to a lot of meetings, the reason you get a sponsor whom you cannot manipulate, the reason that you little by little do these dreadful steps is not to become good. It's the purpose of AA is to little by little alter my perspectives, to make the same things look different. I think the purpose of AA is the same purpose as alcohol, to make things look different, only it doesn't work anywhere near as fast as alcohol. You may have to go to meetings for months to get the feeling you get out of 3 martinis. But on the other hand, you have to vomit up chapter 5 every morning. You know, you're not liable to be arrested for serene on highway. But those are joke reasons. The purpose of doing it, I suppose, is to little by little. Sometimes, you get carried away and think you're doing so much better, but I think there's a much more impressive reason. The reason I keep going to meetings, and the reason I stay involved, is the same reason my sponsor told me 20 years ago. It's to make everybody around me shape up. I tell you, I've sacrificed a lot for those people. And if you just let them go for a couple weeks, they all turn into crapheads again. He's not going to meetings, let's all act weird. Ha! They know on the freeway when you're tired, when you've had 3 hours sleep, you watch them on the expressways, you call them. They say, he's very tired today, let's all drive weird. Intellectually, I know that isn't correct. Emotionally, I know that's correct. But the purpose of AA is to little by little make the world all right, so I can go out in it and live in it. There's only one thing I want to say before I sit down. I do want to warn you that you got to be careful you don't do it too much, because AA can warp you right past where you wanted to stop. I was satisfied. I got to be a marketing director, and I was doing fine, and I kept doing that dumb AA, and I kept right on going. And one day I found myself in some hideous fit of AA ecstasy or something. I resigned a job as a marketing director in Beverly Hills, and for the last 5 years, what I do, I'm the managing director of the Midnight Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles. Don't clap, take up a love offering. People, my friends said, what the hell are you doing that for? I said, I told that son of a bitch I'd be back. They guaranteed me such a significant decrease in salary, I couldn't pass it up. It's not an alcoholic treatment center. I don't help alcoholics. That's what's so silly about it. We feed 150,000 meals a year, and we bed down 50,000 men, and it's got to be the only mission in the world where you don't have to get a sermon to be helped. It is not a treatment center. I'm not a counselor. We just run this mission. It's a funny place. It accepts no federal money or state money or county money. Two times a year I do a mailing to the citizens, and the money comes in and keeps it going, and it really is remarkable. I don't have to take any nonsense from anybody, except that craphead board of directors. Now, that's why I say to you, it's a funny thing. Tonight I'll be on the shores of the warm Pacific, where it's 84 today, and I'll get up and go to work tomorrow morning and drop my son off at St. Mark's School and give him his pep talk. Remember, kid, if it gets too tough there, the Lutheran Church is waiting. I don't really say that, I think it at him. And go to work downtown on Skid Row. And so I don't know why it is. I come home at night and I feel better than when I won an award for my writing. And I'm not, like that old Montesquieu or whoever it was that said, you get that feeling sometimes it's better to light that candle than it is to sit home and curse the darkness around you. And for me, I feel comfortable. I've gotten so serene that this week I'm starting my first diet I've ever had to go on. I have my saccharin with me, and it tastes like crap, I'll tell you. But I want to say before I sit down, if you're new today, or if you're kind of new, don't misunderstand me. We cannot, if you get a sponsor and you go to a lot of meetings and you try to Get involved and be part of things. Even then, we can't guarantee you that in 15 years you'll have your own mission. You know. But I think we can guarantee you that if you work at it, little by little, you will find yourself in the only place that I know of in the world that you will eventually feel secure enough to compare your inside against their inside. When you get secure enough to show them a little bit of yours, you know, you start off like a flasher, you know. And then if you get secure enough to believe that what they're telling you is true, and you get to find out little by little you're not so different. And eventually you'll come to discover the people out there aren't so different either. And the only difference is that alcohol enabled me to get away from what they've had to cope with. Being an alcoholic is like going through life with a menu with no prices. You know, just
Bring me some more, Jim, and when the check comes, you say, well, I don't want that.
yeah. And when you're sober, you can't get rid of the check.
I didn't know it cost that much. Well,
So you learn what to order. And so that you learn to live in a world in which crapheads get fewer and fewer and fewer. And you can walk into the world and live comfortably most of the time. And that's, I suppose, the greatest gift I've ever gotten from AA. I was thinking about the other day, and now that I'm twice a grandfather, and I'm just decrepit. I'm barely able to pitch a doubleheader last Saturday. But the greatest gift I got from AA, and I think it's the one you could understand. They wouldn't understand at Rotary, wouldn't understand at the Chamber of Commerce, but you understand it. Most of the time today, by doing what the people around me in AA are doing, I have the wonderful feeling of I feel the way men look. And I don't know anything better. I thank you for having me. I wish you much luck. Thank you.